It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out for the program today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, you bet. So before we get into the Ask game, I want to begin with something that shapes so much of the way the world is today, which was COVID. 6 years ago, it was changing our lives. How did you get through that era, and how has it influenced either this game or the way that you live your life today?
That's a great question. So basically, I was in Portugal at a time and I was not in a romantic relationship. So I was pretty much on my own. And like for a lot of people, I mean, it was harsh to kind of be, on your own day in, day out and not knowing what was coming. And actually, COVID and the isolation that stemmed from the lockdowns was one of the reasons we ended up publishing the game in the Christmas of 2020. So yeah, I mean, we lost the spaces of connection, of intimacy, of getting together with other people, and I think that's a problem that is there regardless of COVID, but still, it got that much more intense that year.
Yeah. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of Ask, I want to ask you this. If you were to explain what you do for a living right now to a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day in a school, how do you explain what you do for a living?
Let me think for a minute right there. Well, I um I'm trying to rethink the way that human beings are living on Earth on multiple fronts, multiple areas. How can we make the most with the resources that we have? How can we live harmoniously with one another and the planet? Um, yeah, and questioning like, well, I don't know if, yeah, well, 12-year-olds, yes. Yeah, I want to make life better for people and for the planet, I think.
So what did you want to be when you were a kid? What was your dream job?
My dream career was to be a singer. I'm very connected to music and sound, and I think singing was high up there. I'm very connected to the arts, so I used to draw a lot, and I used to teach. One of the things I was doing as a child was to get all my stuffed animals together and all my toys, and I would be teaching them in a classroom, and that kind of aligns with my role as a coach today. So yeah.
Right on. So talk to me a little bit about growing up. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Porto, Portugal, where I am today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the second largest city in Portugal, second to Lisbon, which is the capital. We had a pretty laid back childhood, it's a safe country. We used to walk to school near our parents' home. When I think about my childhood, I think a lot that, like compared to how kids are growing up nowadays, we had a lot of freedom in terms of like playing outdoors and just connecting in yeah, with more freedom, I guess.
So what were some of the early seeds that were planted that became singing, art, teaching, coming up with a game, helping the world get to a more evolved place? What were all of these things that were planted into you that have evolved into what you do today?
Hmm. My father is a musician, not by profession, but he has had his band since he was maybe 14, 15 years old, and they still play to this day. And so music was very much part of our upbringing. He'd be listening to music and cultivate our sensitivity in we would listen to a song and he'd be saying, can you hear that sound? That's the sax. And can you hear that sound? That's the XYZ. And he would like name instruments, and so we would be taking songs apart in that way and then listening in a very different way. And he has a very, very sensitive ear, and I think we got that from him, both me and my siblings. I have a younger brother who is my business partner with the brand Ask, and an older sister. And I think the three of us got that. Um, my godparents, so my father's sister and her husband she's a painter and her husband was an architect. And so the whole, arts thing was in the family, so to say, was seeded into me. And I think my mother kind of pressed on that because she wanted to have been an artist. And my grandfather, her father, didn't allow for that at the time. It was like an edgy thing, and he was quite conservative, so it was a no-go. And I think she always regretted that. So she kind of seeded that into me. And I think from a very early age, I've been a very curious being. I love learning, I love expanding, I love testing. And one of the things I love about how I operate is I love creativity. I love to look at whatever it is I have at hand, be it a problem or a project, and think creatively, expansively, sort of think, how can we see this in a different light and how can we make the best with what we have?
So when it comes to the Ask game on your website, it says put down the phone and share stories. Give us kind of an overview of the game and kind of the
Mhm.
general idea.
Yeah. So I have the cards with me. We can play around if you want. I
Sure.
think that's a good way to introduce it. But
Yeah.
basically, the way the game came about was I saw the concept of conversation starters in the US a number of years ago, and I found it fascinating because very often I would feel that I'm bored in conversation because we're such vast beings and we're so rich. And very often we're talking to people and we're just staying in the surface of things. So, what do you do? Where you come from? And we never, dive deep into all sorts of themes about that person or about the world in general. And when I saw that idea of, cards with questions that you could set at a table, at each seat at a table, and get people to talk about different things, I felt, wow, this is amazing. This is, I'd have a blast doing this. And so I started collecting questions. And when I became a coach, I chose some of those questions. I would carry around a Tupperware box with questions that I would use in the coaching sessions. And I started seeing the potential of like having people sit with different, ways of seeing their lives and themselves and others, perhaps. And that Tupperware box, I ended up having with me most of the time. And then I kept gathering questions. I had a database of over 700 questions at one point. And in the summer of 2020, we spent a holiday with my parents and both my siblings. It was the first time we were all of us together spending a full week of a holiday in 20 years. And we're a close family, but just, life. I lived abroad, my brother as well. It didn't happen in all that time. And we went for dinner. And 5 minutes into the dinner, the same usual dynamics set in. My sister was arguing with my dad, my mother was sad because they were arguing. And it was not nothing major, but just that slow,
Yeah.
um, yeah. And so I was really sad because I felt we're blowing this opportunity to have a really beautiful, connection and moment together. And I remember the Tupperware and I pulled it out and said, let's play a game. And so the way I suggested we'd play it was like we'd pick someone to answer first, and then we would draw a random card so that we would introduce an element of, you might call it chance. I like to call it synchronicity, or even use the game as almost like an oracle for those who want to see it that way. And so basically, we started playing, and the dynamics shifted completely, Joe. It was incredible. There were tears, there was laughter, there was sharing of dreams that we never knew that my parents had, and not because we're not close, but just because we never ventured into those themes. My mother's dream trip, which we actually wanted to gift her a trip altogether. My father's ideal, house or living situation. There was a number of beautiful things that came up. And so my brother was with me at the time. And we really were struck by the potential and the effect of the game. So that stayed with us. And then a few months later, a friend of mine was with me at a bar and I had the Tupperware and I showed him the Tupperware and he said, well, I've been with my girlfriend for 4 years now and I don't know half of these things about her. And then he paused and said, wait a minute, I don't know half of these things about myself. I want one of these. And so one thing led to the next. And a month before the Christmas of 2020, I had a friend who told me, like, I keep hearing you talk about this. There's so much potential. Just publish this for Christmas is a great time. And my brother got together with me and we designed basically we took the 700 questions that I had in the database, added more, and then we distilled, we wanted a game or a set of questions that would be varied enough and that would also range in level of depth. So we basically chose to start the game with 120 questions. Now it's actually 130. But the first edition was 120 questions, and one third of the game are what we call level ones, which are icebreakers, like fun and engaging, lighter questions. And then level two are questions centered around personality, goal setting, relationships, life visioning. And then level three would be either around the mysteries of life and more philosophical or existential questions, or questions that require a greater level of vulnerability for you to share. And so we published the first edition in Christmas of 2020 and we sold out. And then, we're now in the eighth edition. We've done a number of improvements to the game, to the questions, but the core is still the same.
So do you want to ask me one? Do you want to pull one
Yeah.
out and ask? Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I'm gonna pull one question for Joe.
Okay.
Um, all right, so this is a level one. The questions have dots. So it's we have the original game is bilingual, but we now have well, Portuguese English was the first one. We now have a purely English edition and also Spanish English. But the dot in the middle is sort of alluding to the level.
Okay.
If you got it, and it's a level one. If you could have a lifetime supply of something, what would it be?
Oh, it would be sushi. It would be definitely sushi.
Sushi.
Yeah. How about you?
Hmm. Um, Love,
Yeah,
unconditional love.
absolutely. That should have been my answer, but that would be close second for sure. Absolutely. So let me ask you this. Who has been, I mean, to come up with a game, to come up with a higher level of consciousness for people, to get to the heart of the matter, people talk about it all the time, but you're doing it. Who's been that inspirational force that's allowed you to have this foresight, to have this level of soul, to impart that on people?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I don't know exactly. I think there's a part of it that, perhaps I was born with. I also, coming from a fairly conservative Portuguese family. And especially in my adolescence, I didn't have a lot of freedom. And I think I rebelled against that. I wanted to kind of understand, is this how everyone looks at life? Like, what can I question? And I think the whole thing of questioning grew in me from an early age on. And I have maybe a couple of friends who seeded from an early age, like this thing of like, yeah, inquiry of like asking, is this true? Is this really true? And then what would happen if it isn't true? And what would happen if I would ask this or try to look at this in a different way? And I love that. I feel that the moments I feel most alive, Joe, are moments where I feel that my mind has expanded, where instead of just sitting with how I normally operate, someone or something made me look at a situation in a whole different level. And I think when I feel that consciousness expansion, I feel so much zest and so much excitement and inspiration from it that I feel like I'd love to share that with others. I'd love for others to have that experience, so to say. I
So
don't know
when
if that.
Yeah, it totally does. So when you were growing up, what was your favorite game? Whether you played it alone or with friends or with family, what was the game that you loved that maybe either consciously or subconsciously was kind of something that you used as a template for ask?
Hmm. Huh. I don't know if I have one. I remember what I shared with you of teaching, a whole class of toys and stuffed animals.
Yeah.
Teaching was definitely there. I don't know. Um, I can't remember a game that would relate to this, perhaps. I'll see if it comes up in a
Yeah.
moment.
Okay. So let me ask you this. What's been the feedback? Have you gotten some really good feedback from people? Yeah. What have been some top on the list of things that people have sent over?
Yeah, so for us, definitely, like for my family, it was, a level of connection, authentic connection of like really feeling seen and heard and presenced in a way that we never had. One of the questions that came up for my dad was, what are three things that you're proud about yourself? And my dad's kind of shy when it comes to that. So at one point I was actually, feeding in. I was like, hey dad, and what about, music, everything that you taught us about music? And that kind of connection, it was so beautiful to kind of, get to know one another and connect on that level. So that's our own feedback. From clients, we've had all sorts of things. From it completely shifted my relationship to my dad, or it completely turned my Christmas around. It used to be, this boring, semi-depressive thing, and now it's, everyone's interacting. We had couples come back and say that it's shifted their level of intimacy and connection. We have a couple of clients who put ask on their breakfast table and they draw a card every morning as a ritual of connection. We also have that people coming back and saying we're using it in this way. We have clients had a play with their children, and the youngest we've heard so far is 4 years old. And even though, there's some questions that surely they wouldn't understand because it has not been designed specifically for children, even though we have that in mind. Most of the times when I've played with children and feedback from our clients, what I feel is that they interpret the questions in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
some senses, one of the things I think that distinguishes Ask from other decks of this kind, I always say, I didn't invent the wheel. And I think like a book, different authors will write a different book on the same subject. I think it's kind of the same. And one of the things we've heard, we've done a few surveys with clients, and is that Ask is quite versatile. So, you can go deep, but you also have the lighter questions, like the one that came up with you now, that, you could answer a completely material thing, and then you could also answer something that is non-material or different depth. And yeah, where was I going with this? With children, oh yeah, with the audiences. So as with children, what I feel is that when you present Ask to different audiences, and I'm still a bit of a nomad, and I've lived in different settings and a bit all over the world. And when I present it to different audiences, sometimes I'm even like uncertain of whether this would land with that specific audience. And what keeps coming back is the interpretation, or where people take the questions, is different.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes, I get told, well, if I'm playing with someone, they will tell me, well, you created the game, so you know the answers to all the questions. And I always say, well, I never answered all the questions. We have a client in the US who actually did that in one night. They got a timer, they got a pack, some beers, and in a group of friends, they played all 130 questions in one night, 6 hours
Wow.
timer, and just, punching through. I've never done that. I loved hearing that when he came back and told me that. And, even though, say, for instance, this question that came up for you now, I've sat with it more than once. But A, I never answer them all, and B, the answers keep shifting, because what I believe is that we're really works in progress. And so a question that I answered, 3 years ago will certainly have shifted. And the more you go through life and you're informed by answers from other people, or by a podcast that you heard, or by a book that you're reading, or a situation that you've gone through in your life, the answer keeps shifting. And I love to presence that, to kind of see, oh, wow, that's, I answer that question differently.
It's fun because it's almost like reading a book. When you revisit a book, from maybe you read it in your 20s and you get older and you have a different view on life. Your perception's totally different. And this game will stand the test of time because with Monopoly, it's just going to be Baltic. It's never going to change. Or it's going to be whatever property and it's going to be kind of the same thing. But with this, there's such a level of subjectivity that it can evolve. And you had mentioned that too about having more questions and thinning it. Does this game continue to evolve when you do you re-release and update? Are there plans? How does that work?
Mhm. So, we started with 120 questions. It's all we've created everything from the image to we oversee the whole production. I was trained as an artist, and like I also love the sort of making of things. My brother loves design, so we did the whole thing. It's really a two-person team. And one of the things that was interesting, so we decided that 120 questions was, a decent, interesting number to work with. And then at one point we realized that the printing, what do you call it in English? Planes, they actually could fit 130 questions, which only happens if you're in the printers and you understand the process and everything. And I said, well, why are we ditching, paper? Like why are we throwing it away? Then let's make it 130. And actually at that point, we also wanted to add a few questions. The main core of the game of this edition of the original ask is still the same. We did in this last edition, so we're now on edition 8, and from the 7th to the 8th edition we did the biggest change we've ever done. We basically weeded out 26 questions that we felt led people to similar answers, and we introduced new ones that make the game also more interactive, where it's like you ask the question and then it said ask other players to share what they see in you, or to give you ideas about XYZ. And so we're really proud of this last edition. I think it's the most fun. um, that's, as far as it goes in terms of like refining it. We also refine the box and the sleeve that goes outside so that the game, in a shelf in a store will speak for itself. But we don't want to change this edition more than it has thus far. What we do is like we've been, it was the third year last year that we were present at TEDx in Porto. And basically we create a deck for that event because it's always themed. So a couple of years ago, the theme was legacy. Last year, the theme was the most important questions of our time. And for those events, we create a deck that we actually don't sell, but basically we create a deck of 24 questions centered around a theme. And it's a much more time-based deck of questions. For instance, the most important questions of 2025, we had questions around AI and questions around, like living as a human in 2026 or 2025. Asked like the original game is more timeless, as you were mentioning before. And so, at these events, we have every participant coming into the event gets a card. We invite them to come and answer the question in our booth. We collect people's answers to the same questions, and there's a different, kind of interaction. And we also have a journal. Basically, we published the first edition of the Ask Journal in 2023. And the reason for that, or the main reason, was that a lot of our clients were using the game for self-discovery and for journaling. They would pick a card each day and write the answer in a notebook. And so we structured a journal that has a set of exercises around, doing kind of a life audit or a life evaluation, so to say. And then every day you have a new question to sit with that centers around one of the key areas of life, and some exercises that repeat. It's different from the game. It's a more sort of individual deep dive into yourself and how you want to design your life. But yeah, it's a beautiful one as well.
So if you had a dream tonight, ran into the 18-year-old version of you, and you had this game with you, and you handed it over and said, I made this, would that young version of you believe that your life got to this point where you've released this game that's going out into the world?
That's a great question. I love it. Maybe I would believe it. I would probably have designed things in a completely different way. The interesting thing is that Ask happened as a side project. I was working in different things, my brother as well, and here comes this opportunity to publish a game. And at that point, we didn't even think about it. It was like, yeah, let's do this. Let's publish and see where it goes. Fast forward, 5.5 years or 5 years, and things just snowballed. And yeah, I yeah, I might have structured things in a different way. But back to the 18-year-old, yeah, it would have been quite interesting to to see her reaction.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask you a question that could, and I ask this a lot, but this could be a timeless one that could be on a card. Everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, everyone that gets your game, everyone that knows you in a business personal sense, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Hmm. Ha. We're getting into the level three.
Level three,
Level,
definitely.
level three. Um, hmm. I I'm highly creative. Again, like I love looking at a project and thinking like bird's eye view. I studied before studying art. I did 2 years of architecture, and I think I have the architect's mind. Thinking about creating, ideating something, and I feel that I'm quite good at that. I have more of an issue when it comes to um, execution of certain things. My brother is really good at that. Um, and Yeah, I'm right now. I'm basically training to be more skilled at um yeah in that part of like funneling, like narrowing down to, okay, this is what we're gonna run with now. Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's my vision of me? I love to get people talking, Joe. I love
Yeah,
to get people connecting. Like in some of the events where I teach, some heart-brain coherence techniques through breath and centering in the heart and etc., and get people like literally grounded in themselves and not in their minds before they then connect through the cards. It's impressive to see what happens, and I love to be in that space, and I get to be in that space and be the catalyst, so to say, and with the game as well. But like, people just get blown away when they finally, I think in our day and age where doom scrolling is, I was actually, writing newsletters before we hopped on, and I was literally talking about this where, I see people on the streets, and I'm really impacted nowadays with, we're turning into zombies. People are like, the angle of the heads like going down, and people are bumping into things on the streets because they're all looking at their phones, and we're getting wired into something that is not real anymore. And I have, I'm not against technology. I think we always have to look at the pros and cons of things, but I do feel that humanity needs a wake-up call in terms of like, what are we doing with our lives, and what are we doing with our communities, with the people we love? How often do we actually look someone else in the eye and sit with them and connect? And so I think that was the main, idea behind the game. And even when I played with people that I don't know and say, I've been on a date, and take the game and use it in an hour of this sort of intentional conversation through these questions, I feel that you get to know the essence of someone so much faster and in a deeper way. And you also get to know yourself in a different way.
absolutely. So the askgame.com is where to go if you want to get a copy. Any of the good business is at the best place.
Yeah, that's our website for sure. We ship all over the world. We're in Portugal. We're basically right now looking, at distribution in the US, UK, but we're basically in Portugal and Spain at Fnac stores, El Corte Inglés, smaller concept stores as well, note shops and Continent. But this is all, more the European side of things. For the US, we ship from our website.
Okay, excellent. I will put all these links in the show notes. What a wonderful, refreshing story. Thank you so much for taking a minute out, and best of luck with the game. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joe, for the invitation. I appreciate you.
Yes, thank you.